So this is a follow-up video to the last one that I put together. With the last one, I was wanting to do some sort of stream of consciousness thing that I figured would maybe more accurately capture the kind of random web of connections that I made when I was reading this book, Against the Machine. But I watched back through it and decided I didn't know that I entirely did that, at least not in that video alone. So I figured I'd do a more like traditional sort of thing with this one. I guess I'll start this one by saying this. When I was first getting back into reading, I read Crime and Punishment, and there was a part towards the end where, I guess to spoil a lot of stuff, a certain character named Svidrigailov, who's like this devil on the main character's shoulder type guy, he decides that it's all over. Things have not gone well, and so he goes out at like 2 a.m. and comes across the first person that he sees, like some like night security guard at the train station or something, and he tells him that he's about to take a trip to America. And I didn't know what exactly he meant by that, so I did some Googling and listened to some stuff, watched some stuff, and apparently the consensus is that what he meant by that was he's going to kill himself, which then only added more questions. Why does going to America mean I'm going to kill myself? And the more and more I looked into Dostoevsky, the more stuff I read about him, the more stuff of his that I read, it dawned on me that he seems to have thought that America was this place without a soul. And once I got past that kind of initial revulsion to that sort of thing, being an American and all that, I kind of had to admit that he was right, because that was something that I've seen, especially the more and more that I've read from different authors. You get the sense that there's this respect throughout from the 1800s to the modern day. There's this respect for the institutions in America, for the way that we run things, for our government, the fact that it kind of checks itself. But there's this almost pity that the thing that we've given up in exchange for that security is any kind of personal, soul, any kind of personal development in that kind of way. I guess to get back to the book specifically, this machine ideology that he's getting at over the course of this, I could, I guess, find an exact quote and see how he defines it, but to kind of paraphrase, he seems to think that it's this force within us, this almost psychological, sociological force that just drives us forward, growth, more, progress, break down all the barriers that are getting in the way of that. Whether that's, as he points out, on kind of the left wing end of the spectrum, he thinks that the downstream effects of that, of like something like the 60s counterculture movement, are the current drug epidemic that we've got, the current, there's broken families that we have, all the single mothers, but on the more conservative end of the spectrum, because he points out and makes an explicit point to say, this isn't some sort of like political divide. Both sides end up being participants in this, willful or otherwise. But on the conservative end of the spectrum, that takes a form of, we used to, in our Western Christian society, just kind of assume that greed was a bad thing. And now we've made it the entire basis of our entire civilization. And the thing, I guess, from an entirely different author, from an entirely different author that I think kind of captures all that, is there's a part in War and Peace where Tolstoy he's looking back in hindsight at Napoleon and the campaign that he made into Russia, and he seems to say that, looking back with hindsight, that everybody seemed to know that this was not going to end well, that it was going to be disastrous for the Russians, but it was also going to be disastrous for the French. He thinks that Napoleon had some kind of inclination of that, but he went forward with it anyway. Why? And his kind of answer to that is, I think, what he calls inertia, if I remember the term right. It's been a minute since I've read that. But he uses the term inertia. It's just this kind of force, he's caught up in this broader movement. If it wasn't going to be Napoleon, it was going to be somebody else, that there's just this force pushing us forward, no matter what the cost, which is what Kingsnorth in Against the Machine, what he calls the machine ideology. I guess kind of the catalyst that got me thinking about these sorts of issues, and what made me want to go out and read this, was, I don't know why I've been all secretive about this up to this point, as if the people that are likely to see this aren't already aware of this, but I teach, and something I noticed, big difference between this year's students that I've got in the previous couple years is I can't get the students to think beyond like surface level superficial stuff, and it might be a bit of a simplistic answer, at least at first, but it seems to like mostly be AI. They are completely dependent on AI for like their very thoughts. Like big tech has completely succeeded in capturing them, that they have managed to completely enslave an entire generation's mind, which is a terrifying sort of thought. And I felt really validated by that when I saw that there's been a lot of like recent studies. The big one that I heard about like a couple days ago was one by MIT, where they went and they ran brain scans on a bunch of different people. Some that say they never use AI, some that say they sometimes do, and some say they rely on it heavily or whatever. And they found that the people that were more dependent upon AI, that there were fewer neural connections in their brain. Like they were literally, the phrase brain rot was way more accurate than we ever could have thought that it was. So why then? Like Napoleon, why do we keep going forward with it? It seems to be like in the past, there were steps towards this. There was, the invention of the car, which made, I guess, life hard for a lot of the people who had built their entire lives around servicing the horse industry and providing horseshoes for them and food for them and posting stations for them and whatever. But not only that, but the car has literally changed the structure of our society. We're more interconnected because of it, and somehow less connected on the local level because of it. I guess Kingsnorth in this, he thinks it goes even way further back than that. He seems to think the big catalyst that really ignited this was the Protestant Reformation, that this emphasis on the self that comes out of that leads to the Enlightenment and all the ideas that come out of that of rationality and reason, and that's what's eventually led us all the way down here hundreds of years later to the machine. And the thing I think that really startles me about all of it is that in the past, for thousands of years of human history, the absolute pinnacle of our military technology was pointy stick. Like that was the best. We couldn't figure out anything better. Like pike formations and spears were used from like 3000 BC up until like just several hundred years ago. And then we invent the cannon, and then 100 years later, we invent machine guns, and then like just a few decades later, we invent airplanes and the nuclear bomb and biological weapons, and now here we are in our age of the internet and AI and all that. And it seems like we have some new society-changing technology every decade or so, and I don't know how humanity is supposed to keep up with that. We're running into the Napoleon issue there. And normally I'm not somebody that's like an alarmist. I'm normally, when I hear people say the whole adage of, oh, things have never been worse than they are, whether it's about whatever topic, I normally am more of a moderate, I guess, about that. But I do think this is an unprecedented sort of thing, that there's this machine ideology that takes the form of all the stuff I mentioned and others that I won't mention because I could be here listing them all day. I'd say just go out and read this and you'll see what I'm talking about. I do think it's fundamentally changing human beings. And I don't know if there's a ton of evidence for the better. I guess if you were going to try to point to evidence, you could point out our lifespans and the fact that they're increasing, the point that people are healthier and all that. There is evidence you could point towards, but again, back to what Dostoevsky said in Crime and Punishment with Svidrigailov, at what cost? Like, I guess to quote the Bible, what is it to gain the whole world and lose your soul? And it does seem to me that, especially in America, but something that's like a cancer branching out to different parts of the world, we seem to be very much a people that have gained the whole world and we've lost our soul. And his solution for it in this book, I can't remember all of them, but he calls them the 4 Ps. He calls them place, past, prayer, and I forget the last one. But his whole possible solution to this is to go back, to be intentional about forming relationships with other human beings, to be intentional about rallying around some common sense of place, some common sense of roots, some common sense of religion. that without that, it's no wonder that you have this sort of confusion and the nihilism and the angst and all this of the modern sort of era that we're living in. I guess I could try and get to other things, but I think I've managed to hopefully keep that somewhat coherent. So before I fall off the rails, I'm going to end this one here. Hopefully that was helpful for maybe somebody. If it wasn't for anybody else, at least it was for me. Bye.